My entitled family tried to force me to give up the home I worked hard for to my brother and his growing family, but I finally stood my ground and refused to let them take over. My folks, Jed and Karen, all fit the bill for a bunch of self-centered entitled loons. So I picked up my phone and set it to start recording. Jed didn't even seem to give a hoot or notice I'd done it. I'm a single fella in my early 40s. My folks told my bro Jed to take my pad cause I ain't got no kin. Jed's 35, and he's already got 6 young uns now. He had his first at 18, and the second followed a year later. Then the third 2 years after that, and the sixth is the most recently born a few weeks ago is old lady Karen, and I don't see eye to eye, as she always likes to try and get me riled up by acting high and mighty, then turns into a drama queen. If I fight back against her in any way, she can bawl her eyes out in a flash and put on a show to get sympathy from just about anyone. My folks and Jed think she hung the moon, even though they know exactly what she's really like and don't give a hoot. Karen's a looker. I'll give her that, but she's so dang nasty that I could never be sweet on her. She also refuses to get any kind of job even though she's got schooling, and my ma helps with the kids all day, so they're broke as a joke and relying on Jed. This also means they gotta shack up with my folks in the tiny house that was built back when Kennedy was in charge. Growing up, Jed was the golden child. We're 5 years apart, but he got a big head cause I'd get whooped if I tried to get back at him for his shenanigans. It was clear as day. My folks loved him more cause he got the best of everything, unless Ken called him out on it, which happened pretty regular, so my folks hauled us off to live a ways away from him, so they'd only see us at Christmas. Since it was a long drive, Jed beat on me plenty, flirted with my first gal till she gave me the boot and laughed whenever I had hard times, and my folks just said to quit bellyaching whenever it got me down. I only got treated fair when my folks wanted to look good. I gotta admit it was pretty funny seeing their faces whenever they had to treat me same as Jed on birthdays and such, cause other folks were around we had Ken that were real nosy and loved gossip, so my folks did their damnedest to keep things hush-hush and said they'd take all my stuff if I didn't keep my trap shut. If anything, my folks just had more reason to celebrate when I turned 21 and moved out, cause it meant they were done providing for me. I didn't even have my diploma yet when I left, but sleeping on couches was a sight better than living with them. I only saw them once a year, like the rest of the kin. After leaving home, they didn't even come to my graduation, but I didn't give a hoot at that point. The start of the China virus wasn't kind to me. I lost my job and couldn't keep paying for my pad cause my pal Hank also lost his job, and we were both broke even with government money. It was a nice place that cost a pretty penny, and I loved it there as the lease was ending. Hank left early to go stay with his folks, and I had to sell dang near everything I owned, cause I was fixing to be out on the streets if I didn't get rid of most of my stuff. I should have rented a cheaper place so I could have saved more dough, but I was living high on the hog till that life kicked me in the teeth, and I realized I should have been living somewhere that didn't cost an arm and a leg. I stuck to my guns and came up with a plan. I got me a truck just cause I love 'em, so I found a cheap camper in good shape for $1,000 and put it on my truck so I could live in it for a spell. It was supposed to be temporary, but I ended up living in it way longer than I ever figured. I was hoping to be able to park my camper at my folks' place where Jed and his brood still live, but when I asked my folks to let me stay for a bit, they said they were full up and didn't want me there. Plus, we ain't exactly been pals the last 10 years. They said they'd only let me park there if I paid them dang near what it cost to rent a place in my neck of the woods that was way too steep just to park my camper. I was out of work and trying to save as much of my government money as I could till I could find a new gig. I may as well be renting a place with the price they were asking. My folks called my camper an eyesore and told me to get lost since we couldn't see eye to eye, and still thought it was a real hoot that I had to live in a camper. Jed joined Karen in pointing and laughing at me, calling me a hobo. I parked my camper in a store lot to sleep the first night. I had nowhere else to go. I was shaking in my boots that someone might try to break in. Wasn't no way I slept a wink that night. There was nowhere else I could go. All my kin with houses were a ways off, and all my pals lived in apartments, and I didn't want to leave my stomping grounds. I'd also had my mail sent to a buddy's place. It was the only way I could get my mail anymore. Finding a good place to park was a real pain. I went looking to try and find a job like my old one. Took months of living the camper life. In that time, I had to deal with all sorts from bums and junkies to folks telling me to scram because my camper was an eyesore. One fella who told me to get claimed to be with an HOA. I wasn't even parked on a street with houses, and when I asked what HOA, they got madder than a wet hen and made threats. I moved my camper anyhow just to steer clear of trouble to keep the lights on. I figured out how to use a long extension cord to plug in wherever I could to juice up my camper batteries. This meant sneaking around and plugging into an outlet on some random building while parked on a street. I know that ain't right, but I had to keep my batteries going so my fridge would stay cold. I had a little solar charger for my phone, but nothing like a generator, and those things are loud and need gas anyway. So I did what I had to. After months of that, I finally landed a new job. I had to go to the next town over to find work that wasn't clerking. I clerked while in school and swore never again, though I was about ready to go back on my word. I was still getting government money, but I had nowhere to live while getting it, and I didn't want to be out of work when it dried up, plus I was bored as all get out. I had nothing to do but read, watch flicks on a little DVD player, use my phone or computer and keep track of where I could park and what public crappers I could use. Kind of envied the Japanese having public bathhouses. We could use stuff like that here. When I finally got a new gig, I dang near lived in the back lot of the building by the warehouse in old parking spots. Nobody, the only folks who seemed to use them because they were so dang far in the back that the area was pretty much forgotten. My boss, the head honcho, actually liked this setup because I was willing to take any shift I could get as long as I got enough shut-eye. He even let me take the camper off my truck and park it in one of the spots so I could drive around without it. Not rightly sure if this was on the up and up, but nobody gave us any guff the whole time I lived back there. I didn't have to deal with many varmints, just a few, but the guards ran them off. I was pretty much on call around the clock when they needed me and worked dang near every day of the week. My boss let me hook up my camper to the building for electricity and water, and I paid a little rent by working for free on Sundays when nobody else was in the office except the cleaner and guard. Other than that, I usually had to wash up at a pal's place or at my gym since the camper didn't have a shower, just a port-a potty, and I didn't want to fill it because dumping it is a nasty job, so I used other crappers as much as I could. I had a key to the warehouse and could go in to use the John anytime. I was even buddy-buddy with the night guard. He's since become one of my best pals. The camper was easy to heat in winter with a little electric heater. Summers were a real bear, though the camper didn't have AC, so I had to get a used portable unit just to make it livable. I worked a lot of overtime and learned some new tricks from the other fellas. Eventually, halfway through this year, I got a better job in the company as a boss and started making more dough than my old gig. That's when I decided I wanted a house. The scare I got from losing my condo made me see I needed something more steady for the long haul. I looked around for something near work, and just a couple miles away, found a 3-bedroom trailer on a little plot, but I somehow got it for $10,000 less than they were asking. I used about all my savings for the down payment, and got the okay for a home loan. I finally didn't have to live in a camper no more. There was room for me to back my truck in behind the house to take the camper off and set it up in the yard, so I put it there as its own little shack just in case I want to use it again. When I was all settled in the house, I was fool enough to brag about it on Facebook. My kin saw the post, and that's where this mess really starts. After a few weeks, my folks and Jed, along with his brood, showed up out of the blue to have a look. See, at my digs, I never even gave them my address, so how they found out where I live I still ain't sure. None of my pals fessed up, and no other kin visited me before that, so I reckon they might have stalked me at work and followed me home or something. It really wouldn't shock me once I opened the door. They about all shoved their way in like a bunch of rowdy tourists, then just started making themselves to home. They all kept snooping around, and Karen still had this creepy smirk that she kept flashing me, and it was only later that I figured out why, and it made me madder than a bull on steroids that just got stung by a hornet. My folks kept jawing about how I got so much extra space now, and it's too much for someone like me with no wife or young gains, and Jed kept going on about how there was more room than our folks' house and my place was closer to his job. 2 red flags all around, I tell you. Eventually Jed asked to jaw with me in private, everybody else up and skedaddled onto the front porch. That's what finally made me see it cooked up some scheme. Jed said the house was too much for just me and I ought to let him move in with his brood, cause Karen's got another bun in the oven and my place is a lot closer to his job. He put I already got the camper, so I could just live in that outside while they take over the main house. And I want to make it clear, Jed never once said nothing about paying rent. Mind you, he's got a good job. He also started going on about how there'd be changes and even curfews, and that I couldn't just waltz in any old time without giving a holler first. If it weren't my own brother, I'd think the fella I was talking who had gone plumb loco, but Jed lost his marbles ages ago thanks to our folks treating him like he was the center of the dadgum universe. I tried to get a word in, but he kept jawing over me like I had no say in the matter. There was no way in hell I'd let my place, or parts of it, to him. Other folks maybe, just so I can pay off the mortgage quicker, but sure as shooting not him or his nasty old lady. I've heard of this exact kind of sitch in videos online bunches of times, and never once did I reckon I be living it, because I thought it's so gosh darn crazy. But my folks, Jed and Karen, all fit the bill for a bunch of self-centered entitled loons, so I picked up my phone and set it to start recording. Jed didn't even seem to give a hoot or notice I'd done it, and just sat there flapping his gums about all the reasons why he needed my house, then went from saying that to acting like it was all settled and trying to shake my hand. That's when I finally showed some backbone and hollered hell no loud enough that Jed about fell over. I'd hardly ever raise my voice to him like that, because I get whooped by our folks whenever I've did, but this was my house, not theirs. My hind hand shined bright as it once here. I stood up and told him my house wasn't up for grabs, and acting like I'll let him move in just because they want it won't make it happen. I bought my place for me, and it ain't my fault he keeps having more youngins and has to keep shacking up with our folks because he's broke. Jed got right up in my face without actually touching me and said I didn't deserve the house and he needed a better place for his kin to live. I laughed in his face and said that was a load of bull, because I worked my tail off to be able to buy my house. Of course I deserved it. Jed started hollering that I got no wife or kids and I don't need all the space, so I may as well give it to him. I said I ain't giving him diddly, and he never even offered to pay me rent. If I let him move in, I'd still be covering the whole dang mortgage on my own house without even being able to live in it. Jed said he shouldn't have to pay rent because his family comes first, and our folks said I was gonna do this and that I would. I yelled like their word was law or something and told Jed they didn't have the right or power to give my house to him. Then my ma and Karen barged back in through the front door and ganged up on me to try and make me cave. There was a whole lot of fighting, but long story short, I must have heard him say, "Just do it for Jed," more times than I can count. In the ruckus I told them all they got no say in my life or my house, and to get before I called the law. Karen screeched the loudest at me about how she's not up again and I ought to do this for her. I said I ain't done squat to her. She just reckoned she could take and hake from me like I'd let her. I don't owe her or her kin a dadgum thing. Then I called her a high and mighty witch who never had no respect for me, so I don't give a hoot what she thinks or how many brats she's got. I got no pity for her. She ain't gonna be living in my house. Well, that riled her up something fierce, and she came at me. She got in one good lick on my face and tried to do more, but Jed held her back, kicking and screaming. She kept hollering for him to let her go so she could claw my eyes out. The phone I was holding got about all of it, so I held it up and said I'd call the cops if they didn't skedaddle pronto. My folks told Jed they were leaving. Then my ma said I had a week to wise up. I told her I won't, and to stay gone. Then I told Karen my phone got it all, and if she tries anything I'll have the law on her. She screeched at me and stormed out, bawling her eyes out with her face in her hands. My ma was the last one out the door and said I best do this for Jed and Karen. I told her straight out I won't. Part 2 of the story. After I booted my folks, Jed and Karen, out for trying to make me fork over my new digs to my brother, I hightailed it to Facebook and spilled the beans to the whole dang family. It got around real quick, but you won't find it now because it all got wiped out a spell back. When I made my own profile private, I posted about it because I knew the first thing my kin would do when they got home is try to spin it to make me the bad guy, and I hit this nail on the head. But I had about an hour to get a head start for them, and I had the video proof to back up my tale about what they'd done. Jumping the gun worked because I got a good number of kin on my side. Lickety split. My folks, Jed and Karen, must have been all set to write their own post, but it was too late, so they didn't even bother trying to fib much. My folks, Jed and Karen, had a couple of bootlickers on their side, but that's about it. Plenty of others knew how entitled they already were, so what happened was something they all caught on to real quick. There was one varmint in particular that ran me up. I ain't sure who they were, but they raved at me that I was a rotten brother and I needed to make way for a real family man. I just hung up on him and blocked the number. That didn't happen again. The week went by and my folks showed up with Jed at my front porch, just like they said they would when they gave me that ultimatum. They rang my doorbell like crazy and banged on the door till I finally answered. I cracked it open and they tried to bust in again, but I put in some latched chains that stopped them and even put my body up against the door for good measure. My pa and brother demanded them in, but I said I was recording it all on camera and would call the law if they tried to break in again. My ma settled him down, and then in her phoniest sweet voice, asked if I was ready to let my brother move, and I told her, and the rest of them to go to hell, and never darken my door again. My ma put on the crock tears and asked why I can't just do this for Jed because he's my dear brother. So I laughed and told her straight out I don't love him like a brother because he treated me like crap for years. I only egged him on. Their sorry excuses for parents and he's a sorry excuse for a brother. Then told him to get, or I'd be calling the cops right quick. They all left real easy, like apart from my ma's loud bawling, and the others giving me stink eye. You could say making them leave was a mite too easy. I reckon the whole dang mess was over, but I guess I should have taken a more serious like because they had other fool plans. I came home later that week on a Friday evening to find a moving truck and Jed's minivan parked in my driveway. It was Jed and his brew there, moving their stuff, and he just waved at me with a crap-eating grin. When I saw him I was madder than a wet hen and told him and the rest of his kin to quit, but Karen smugly said to me that like it or not they were moving in, and then in the most phony way while cocking her head and sticking out her lips, she said it was just fine because my mama said so and I ought to always mind what my mama tells me. I was so damn mad hearing those words and seeing her smug mug that I locked myself in my truck to call the law right quick. When they saw what I was doing, Karen started pounding on my window and hollering at me to stop, and that I can't do this to her because she and Jed need the house, and she bawled, "Why can't you just do this for Jed?" I hollered back, "Jed, it's my gosh darn house, not his." Then she threatened to tee the side of my truck if I didn't quit calling the cops, all of which the 911 gal heard because the window was cracked. I told Karen if she messed up my truck I'd sue her, and she was smart enough to back off. When the law showed up, Jed and Karen and their brats had locked themselves in my house. I told the cops what happened and showed them my new license with my address on it. Then, when we went to my front door I saw they changed the lock and the old one was lying on the porch with the middle of it drilled out, and the drill they used was right there with a whole set of Harbor Freight bits. I pointed out the busted lock and drill, then gave the cops the whole story of what happened before. Well, I reckon Jed must have called our folks over at some point after I got home because they showed up while I was talking to the lot. My folks straight up lied and started saying I'd agreed to let my brother and his kin rent my house. I said that was an easy fib to catch one way or t'other. So Jed and Karen finally came out of my house with some papers in hand. They both looked real smug, like they'd somehow put one over on me. They'd gone and drawn up a fake rental deal. But my John Hancock wasn't on it. There was one, but it didn't look like my chicken scratch. I don't reckon any of them have ever actually seen my signature, so that was dumber than a box of rocks on their part. I told my folks and Jed that was some stupid bald-faced fraud, and if the law looked into it they'd figure that out right quick, and I don't reckon going to the slammer would do him any good. It could even make Jed lose his job, which is the only way he's got to provide for his kin. I also said I'd get me a lawyer and for damages if anything of mine was lost, stole or wrecked, and I'd call CBS to boot. Jed went white as a sheet and looked powerful scared when I said all that, but my ma got between us and kept going on about how I ought to just do this for Jed and live in a Dan camper so they can finally have a family house to themselves. I yelled at her that if she thought it was such a bright idea she could do it for Jed herself and let Jed have her place. Instead, the cops got my ma away from me, and I said I wanted them all out right this second or I'd press charges. I hollered about how they drilled out my front door lock, who break into lease papers were obvious fakes. They forged my signature real bad, and I got video of Heron jumping me. Those are felonies I could ruin them with if I wanted, and if they didn't get, that's exactly what I'd do. The only reason I hadn't already was for Jed's youngin's sake. So they got one shot to skedaddle. The second my folks heard that, I reckon it finally sunk in that they couldn't make me do it for Jed. My ma gave up and said she'd put a stop to this. Then she went over to Karen and had a quiet word with her for a minute while my pa talked to Jed. Karen right away started bawling something fierce and tearing up the fake rental papers into itty-bitty bits and tossing them like confetti, only to have a lawman tell him to pick up the scraps, or he'd write him up for littering both of the cops. By now, had the I don't get paid enough for this looks on their mugs, Jed had to start telling his brats to load their stuff back in the moving truck. The kids were all crying and the oldest was boohooing that he won't get his own room now. Karen and Jed gathered their brood up to try and make one last sorry attempt to guilt me with the sad family act. I swear I think they practiced it beforehand. All the kids had the same begging look with wobbly lips. Karen kept rubbing her baby bump and tilting her head to look like a kicked pup, and my brother just made the saddest face he could and said, "Please, don't do this, we got to be able to live here." But I didn't give an inch and told him to keep hacking all the kids, and Karen turned the waterworks up to high heaven, and Jed hollered at me, "Are you happy with yourself? You've kept us from having a home because you're too damn selfish to share and help out." Can I busted out laughing like at loon and shot back that what he was trying to do was taking, not sharing, and no amount of bullying will make me let his kin move in, because he ain't no brother of mine no more. He's just a self-centered jackass who thinks he can take whatever he wants from me, like when we was kids, and started cussing me out till the law told him to simmer down or he'd be in bracelets. Whether I wanted to press charges or not, he sucked in his lips and looked scared and madder and hell all at once. I asked the cops if they could stick around till my folks Jed and Karen had all vamoosed, and they said they weren't going nowhere till this was settled. In fact, in the next few minutes 2 cops turned into 4 as more pulled up for whatever reason that lit a fire under my folks. To get a move on, I made Jed give me the keys to the new lock he put on my front door. He sure didn't want to hand him over. Then instead of giving him to me, he straight up chucked him down the street and in a storm it rained while telling me to go get him myself. But one of the cops tore into him for that and made him go fetch him. He had to pull the grate off just to get at him, and he got real dirty doing it. When he got the keys back, he just grumbled, then smacked him down into my hand. I then told them all to get and stay gone. My ma said I'd be disowned for this, like that was supposed to scare me, and I said as much to him. Then in a real sarcastic voice I said something like, "Oh no, that means I won't get to come to any holidays with y'all, where I always get treated like crap by a lot of you anyhow, cause Jed's always been your golden boy, treating me so dang bad when I was growing up that if Jed ever needs a donor I wouldn't give him squats. So do like you always told me to do when y'all done me wrong, and suck it up." My folks were gobsmacked after I said all that, and the 4 cops were giving him some real judgy looks too. I tell you, if you want to put rotten parents like mine on the spot, call them out in front of the law, cause they'll probably not try any real dumb stuff. Then my mom just started bawling and walking away. My fa just stood there looking like he wanted to knock my block off, and Jed just held his youngins in defeat. Oh, and Karen was off pitching a hissy fit in my front yard. Pretty soon they all made a line handing out boxes and got their stuff out of my house. Nothing had been unhacked yet, so it all got hauled out real quick. But while doing it, my ma kept saying it wasn't too late, and I could still do it for Jed a bunch of times, each time trying to wheel and deal more and more to get me to change my mind. She said Jed hey me rent if I'd let him stay, and when that didn't work, she said I could move back in with him to let Jed rent my place so I wouldn't have to share the house. I told her to put a sock in it and keep packing boxes, because I don't want Jed or his kin around. I don't want his money, and I sure as heck don't want to live with him or my folks ever again. After how they done me when I was a young un, making a deal with my folks would be like selling my soul to me. Karen ended up throwing another hissy fit after hearing that and chucked a box down, then plunked herself on the ground to have a pity party because she didn't want to go back to sharing a house with my folks, and she just sat there looking madder than a wet hen until everybody else was done. She didn't even want to get up when it was time to go. They finally got everything out of the house and into the truck, so before they left I laid into my folks one last time about all the crap they put me through growing up, and with 4 cops right there they couldn't do much except stand there and take it. For once I called them out on so many things that happened and even pointed out how they couldn't just do something nice for me, like letting me stay over with my camper when I was on the streets and trying to get back on my feet. How they let Jed and Karen poke fun at me and call me a hobo. Well, who's the hobo now? They wanted to boot me out of my own dang house so Jed could stay in it for nothing. Yet when I needed a place to crash. They wanted to bleed me dry for more than I could afford. Just to arc my temper when they knew I was out of work. There was more real judgy looks from the hops when I said all that, so I put my folks on the spot one more time and asked them what I ever done set being born to deserve being treated so dang bad. Because when I finally catch a break in life, they want to snatch it away from me for their golden boy, since they'd rather I give everything to Jed and have nothing for myself. I bought my house with the money I earned. I don't owe him squat, and I won't be asking nothing from him ever again, because it's clear as day I'll never be anything more than a doormat or a cash cow to him. I got no answers from him. They just stood there with their mouths hanging open, so I kept on ranting and asked him what in tarnation made him think they were such great parents after all that. My pa was red as a beet, but more from being shamed than angry this time, and my ma was bawling that she was a dang awful person. I straight up agreed. She is an awful person, they all are, and I bet they'll go to hell for it to boot. They were excuses for people and they all knew, but if I called him out on all this mess in private instead of in public, they just get riled at me and still act like I'm the one in the wrong. They just kept up the denial for so long that it got to be a part of who they are. My ma buried her face in my pa's coat to cry, and my pa looked more beat than I ever seen him. Jed and his kin steered clear of me entirely as they finished loading everything back in the moving truck. I made sure nothing of mine got swiped, not that I'd had a chance to get much furniture yet. They all piled back in their rides, and Karen just stood there giving me the stink eye till my brother finally got her to drive the minivan home, and soon as they'd was all gone, I got back online again and spilled the beans. But what happened, my folks was too ashamed to even try and stick up for what they'd done this time, and while the family was kind of split before this mess, it was now a landslide in my favor. Near about all the kin sided with me after this ruckus, and those who didn't just ain't siding with nobody, no matter how much my folks tried. We done it for Jed bit before, ain't nobody listening no more, so any kin they still had in their corner is long gone. Lots of the family who I figured would back me did. That includes the ones who used to do their dirty work, so I reckon they finally had their fill. Round that time I offered to have half the family over at Christmas. Even at my new place my folks wasn't invited. I wasn't blocked on my brother and Karen's Facebook, funny enough, and I saw Karen had her fourth youngin in early November. They still shacking up with my folks. I'm pretty dang sure they knew I was watching, because Karen kept making snippy posts every couple weeks or so about not having enough room while living with my folks, probably to see if she can still guilt me, and I'm sure it's driving my ma and pa up a wall, because they ain't no peace and quiet in their golden years with 3 wild bratty kids, a crazy Karen, my golden boy brother, and a new baby in the house all at once. Maybe they could move into a camper in their own backyard and let Jed take over their house totally. They might get some quiet, and then yeah, they could do that for Jed. Part 3 of the story. For those who kept saying I should have just had my brother and Karen hauled off to jail, the only reason I didn't was because they got youngins, and if Jed got locked up he'd probably lose his job, and without that his kin's got no money, and Karen's got a baby just a few months old right now. Neither of them need to end. I'd asked half the family over for a Christmas Eve shindig at my place, and everybody I asked all showed up, even though it was a good long haul of around 3 to 4 hours for him. But they wanted to come and show they was on my side. I got praised by him a whole bunch for how hard I'd worked to get a house on my own, and that they was sorry for everything I'd been through. I got asked why I didn't just take my camper and drive the 3 hours back to him instead of living pretty much on the streets for so long, and I had to bashfully fess up that I was real fond of living around here, and I had my best shots at work in these parts. My hometown ain't got a whole lot of good jobs in my line of work, if any at all, and I wanted to my own way far as I could, and they mostly bought that. We moved on to having a real nice party, the best I'd been to in years. Some kin even brought seeds of swell Christmas tunes, and I gotta say the one my uncle brought of Ray Charles was my fave. He croons Christmas songs like nobody else I ever heard. It was a grand old time. I felt like for once I could just forget my past troubles and live in the moment. But I wouldn't be writing this if it had stayed that way. About 2 hours into the shindig, you know who showed up? My folks, Jed and Karen Waltz, didn't trying to look all smiley. They didn't even knock, just strolled right in my front door like they was supposed to be there. I cut the music and told him to skedaddle pronto. They begged to stay and said they brung presents. One of my uncles hopped up and hollered at him for I got another chance to talk, and he said they don't deserve to be in my home or my life, after the crap they tried to pull months before, and he was backed up by a bunch of other kin. Mind you, this fella's my ma's brother, and he used to be right fond of her till he found out about the mess that went on between me and my folks. My grand folks, old as they are, about got in the middle and said to my folks that if they want to patch things up with me it's way too soon, and they ain't never been more let down by him than they was this past year. They'd hid there playing faves with my brother from prying eyes for a long spell, but nobody was fooled no more, and they needed to make a real go of trying to actually treat me like a son. If they ever wanted to be in my life again, then they turned to Jed and Karen and said they seen the broken record bull Karen keeps posting about. They're sick of it, and to just drop it already. My house ain't gonna be their new home. Karen went back to her usual trick of bawling and had a pity party about how she ought to be the one living here and not me. She flopped down in a chair to pitch a fit and say it wasn't right I got this house to myself when I ain't got no family of my own, and she's got 4 kids that need more room, and she just wanted a nicer place to live and feel like a real mama. It was petty of me, but I said loud and clear that she stinks as a ma because she lets my ma do most of the rearing while she sits on her rump all day boozing, playing on her phone, or going out and blowing all of Jed's money, and she's got the gall to gripe about it. I even cracked wise that I'm shocked her baby don't get Loli from her mommy's milk since she drinks so much hooch, which I admit was a mite too much because I got some looks, and Karen demanded to know if I was calling her a bad mama. I said the proof's in the pudding, and if she wanted to be able to afford to move out of my folks' place someday, then she needs to put her fancy school into work, get a job, and learn to pinch pennies. My ma already does most of it looking after my brother's youngins anyhow, so she'd have plenty of time once her baby gets a bit bigger. Jed's oldest kid, who's a 7, come running up to start kicking and screaming at me for yelling at his mama, and he kept at me about how his mama said I was the bad guy who made her cry and wouldn't let him live here. That's when my brother grabbed his boy to haul him off, but all the other kin jumped in, and this kind of turned into a family meeting against Karen and my brother. She was bawling, her new baby was bawling, her kids was bawling, shoo. Even Dad was about to turn on the waterworks from the tongue lashing he was getting walloped with. He ended up just sitting on the ottoman. I keep shoes on by the front door and looking like a total wreck. He couldn't look nobody in the eye. He couldn't even get 2 words out to me, not with a whole house full of mad folks ready to rake him over the coals if he tried to let his inner golden boy out again. If they wasn't there to get in his way, I'd wager this would have ended up a repeat of when he tried to boss me around to try and take my house months before. By this point, though, he'd been so dang shamed that his and my folks' name in the family was totally shot because the masks was all off now. Right quick after my folks Jed and Karen all left with their tails between their legs, the party got going again, and we all steered clear of talking about what just happened the rest of the evening, since most of the grown-ups had been tipping the bottle. Everybody stayed over at my place. I even let some of them bunk in the camper, so there'd be enough room. I fess up, it makes a good guest house to my hin all wanting to look-see of it earlier, and they said they couldn't believe I'd been living in it for around 2 years. I got a heap of questions about it, like what summer and winter was like and so forth. I was up earlier than everybody else Christmas morning, and had a fresh pot of joe and some ibuprofen for the spiked eggnog hangovers, a few of them, and I got told I was a way better host than my folks ever was, and we all agreed to do this again next Christmas. After Christmas, Karen did finally quit making posts. It was clear jabs at me and Whitehall, the old ones too, but not long after New Year's. She more recently made a new post belly aching about how she tried to talk my folks into getting a camper like I did so it could be parked in the backyard so Jed and his kin could use the whole house as their family home. Well, a dose of your own medicine ain't never fun, because my folks turned that notion down right quick. I hear nobody's gonna shove them out of their own home, much less their bedroom. The post was only up a couple days before Karen took it down, and she's hardly posted nothing since then. She loves to gripe, but if a tree falls and nobody's around to hear it, can still gripe. So I reckon Karen's figured there's no point in doing it when nobody's listening no more, and Jed can't afford to move his brood out on his paycheck alone anytime soon. If they end up expecting another youngin in the next few years, I won't be shocked. Things settled down for me since then, and I've even had pals over for poker night. I'm lousy at poker 'cause I can't never remember a dang thing about it, but who cares, we get to drink, brew, and eat junk while being married fools. We all loaded up on whoppers from Burger King and just had us the best time. Grown men. Hen, when they just want to have a good old time and get sloshed. I think maybe around summer I'll see about maybe courting someone. I ain't exactly getting no younger. Here's hoping that goes well. My camper just sits in my yard now, and I fess up, there were some days I went out there just to pass the time in it. I did live in it for 2 years. It's like my second home, and maybe one day I'll actually get to use it for camping like it's meant for. I ain't never been camping. My folks reckoned it was a waste of time, so it'd be a whole new thing for me.